From the get-go in Dusk, the player is thrown into the middle of the action and must defend themselves from the dangers that lie in wait for their arrival. First enemies the player encounters are clearly inspired by Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just one of the many other influences from the horror genre this game throws at the player, like ghosts, demons, and rats. Chief among these influences is the darkness that is filling the atmosphere around the player, hence the title, whether underground or above. Furthermore, these elements combined make for a perfect amalgamation of adrenaline rushes to accompany nearly non-stop action throughout the game from fight-or-flight responses. At its core, Dusk is a retro first-person shooter like Half-Life Deathmatch. It even has a multiplayer mode to match. However, it is often dead nowadays, so the main attraction in Dusk is player versus entity, that is, the story or endless mode, with varying difficulty levels associated with them to boot. In the story, there are 3 episodes to choose from that function as funnels from the easier to more medium levels of craziness, and then to the higher levels of madness at the end. The very first episode showcases the physics and basic mechanics, like how to pick up soap and one-shot every single entity in the game. In addition to that, it showcases the less strange side of the game as far as demonic anomalies, aliens, and giant alligators residing in a singular location goes. From there, the player can discover secret locations and even sometimes secret levels. After this, the player is funneled into the Half-Life HECU-infested facilities where the game amps up its craziness and introduces the player to things like wendigos, tall mouths, and fat guys with exploding balls. Furthermore, this is where the game starts changing up level design to reflect progression, namely in aesthetics. For instance, in the Infernal Machine, the player is thrust into what looks to be the bowels of a giant monster. However, there are more striking changes that reflect what is to come in the latter half of the game in Etcher's Labs, that toy with the physics of the game and how the level plays out with gyroscopic motion. From there, the craziness of the game just keeps on getting amped up until the very end of the game, especially the physics within its limitations. This is no more apparent than in Homecoming, a level that once again toys with the orientation of the player from sideways, backwards, and upwards motion. The instant the player discovers this is a moment of shock, fear, and overwhelming joy because it comes as a surprise adrenaline rush after leaping into the unknown. Not only that, but there are more grounded experiences with gothic influences like sword fights with ghost knights in the Iron Cathedral and climactic battles with airborne wraiths, Eyes of Cthulhu from Terraria, and that one fish from Half-Life 1, and the City of Shadows that fills up with water by the end, making the player more waterborne than in any other level in the game. The game just keeps on throwing the player for loops with things like tornadoes enveloping entire monasteries, puppies to lighten the mood, and literally fighting the head developer of the game at the end right before both killing and becoming a god. However, that is not to say the player cannot enjoy this game after experiencing such an occurrence. From the endless mode that is much more streamlined to fit a casual session of gaming to the multiplayer mode that is optimized to be played just like the multiplayer games that inspired it, the game still has content to boot if the player is dissatisfied with the story mode. Ultimately, the endless mode is a casual horde shooter like zombies from Call of Duty, just without wall buys. So in theory, someone could play the game infinitely using the mode. Likewise, the multiplayer mode is equally as much as a contender for endless playtime with the game if it were not often dormant. That is, the multiplayer has had very few active players every time I have utilized it, and likely will not gain more because it is a game that attempts to emulate a retro shooter that has become older as time progressed, as things naturally do. Due to its age, it has recently got an anniversary update to celebrate 5 years of existence with updated graphics, a native software development kit, and most importantly, mods to boot. With this comes a completely new way to explore the game via the Steam Workshop. In addition to that, the developers made an actual total conversion system for Valve games detected on your system like Half-Life 1, Blue Shift, and Opposing Force, which is an incredible feat, let alone mentioning the impressive graphical fidelity that will make your TI 4090s rev up to the max from Dusk HD. Ultimately, Dusk is a good semi-modern retro shooter for player versus entity content because unfortunately as time passes on, the servers of games depopulate, and unless the multiplayer is tampered with like Half-Life 1, I suspect the multiplayer of the game will die off completely. However, that does not mean players cannot enjoy old games just because everyone else has moved on. You can instead enjoy the blissfulness of the moment-to-moment experiences the game provides, whether in the story or otherwise accessible modes in solitude.